the believer, I mean, we could just get into it. I mean, I don't think anybody doesn't know the situation that's going on in Venezuela. I'm next to Trinidad and Tobago is right next to Venezuela, so we've been getting for the first time an influx of what you'd consider refugees, really.
The Venezuelan refugee crisis?
The Venezuelan refugee crisis. I mean, Colombia is taking the bulk of it because, of course, Colombia is Spanish speaking, Venezuela is Spanish speaking, Trinidad not so much. But what the Trinidad does have is good relations with the U.S. And a lot of the Venezuelans who actually have money, they want to set up a business in Trinidad, make a bit of income, and then try to pivot to get to the United States. And it's easier to do that because all the flights are controlled. You can't get like a flight to the United States without like government authorization. You need to have a reason to do that. And the government controls the currency. So there are 3 exchange rates. There's the public rate, there's the preferred rate, and then there's a business rate. And that's contributed to the empty shelves because companies can buy US dollars at a much cheaper rate than the public, and then they just sell it to the public and make the spread, so they don't actually have to do any business.
Right.
So they don't need to import anything. They don't need to, all this other stuff. So
real quick, so we do actually have a few viewers. I don't know if you've seen that. We have some people in the chat right now.
Hey guys,
we've got a little comment here, which I think is interesting. From one little Alex, it says he says at some point Venezuela might as well drop their currency and trade in products alone.
It would be great. It would be absolutely great if they actually produced anything anymore, because the other side of the coin is the destruction of property rights. And I actually have a video on my YouTube channel. Will Trinidad and Tobago end up like Venezuela? And I basically explain, if you destroy property rights and you print money to pay your debt and you have this fucked up exchange rate, you're going to destroy your economy. So I think GM had a manufacturing plant in Venezuela. It was seized. Heimlich & Payne, which is the like all the oil rigs, they own the oil rigs. The big companies like Texaco and Amoco and stuff, they rent from Heimlich & Payne. So they were like, American companies that were drilling oil in Venezuela, and they came and they seized all of the rigs from Heimlich & Payne. And so that's the problem. That's why nobody wants to actually produce anything in Venezuela, because if you have a successful business, Mr. Stateman is going to knock on the door and be like, hey, we're taking over this for the public good. And they destroy what's left. Most recently, Maduro, because of the situation. So to bring everybody up to speed, the opposition leader has basically declared himself the interim prime minister. President. Sorry, they have a president. And he's sworn to kind of, take over and stuff like that. And he does have support, but he didn't actually win an election to do this. And the grounds for which he's doing this is basically the humanitarian crisis in Venezuela, right? There's no food, there's no work, there's no investment, and all these other things. And given the low price of oil and the huge spending of the state, there's just no money. And Maduro knows this, so he's concentrated resources to basically party members and, of course, the military, because he wants them on their side. So this is the dilemma. I don't know if this is going to be successful or not, because the opposition hasn't actually won an election. But because of the continued humanitarian crisis, there might be grounds to declare him kind of as a despot, and might be grounds on international law to remove him from power. And that's the debate at the moment. So what's ended up happening, the leader of the opposition, I can't remember his name. I don't know if you could look up his name in the meantime. He's kind of gone into hiding because technically it's treason.
Their new president?
Yeah, well, the self-declared new president of Venezuela. So he's in hiding. Maduro has basically said this is a U.S. plot, and he's broken off diplomatic relations with the U.S., demands that the ambassador leaves. They're not going because they don't recognize his legitimacy. And it's a fight for power. And the real question is, who controls the military? And Maduro has the edge because he's feeding them. Right? It's the only food that comes in is basically for the military and party leaders. Yeah, who is the opposition leader? I can't remember his name.
One
Mm.
Guaido?
Yeah, it
Guaido?
might be Guaido.
Guaido?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, it's so it's funny. I type in 2019 Venezuelan president. First thing that pops up, Wikipedia 2019 Venezuelan presidential crisis.
yeah, yeah. And it is big news. So like why I actually wanted to touch on this is because there's an implication for this for my home country of Trinidad and Tobago. Now, again, look, Trinidad and Tobago is very left. They've never had a conservative government, very socialist. It's an oil economy, and the production of gas, oil and natural gas in the country has been declining for some time. And the government, with I don't think much foresight, has latched their future of gas production to a Venezuelan deal to access Venezuelan gas fields. So they're basically saying, well, even if we run out of gas, we have the skill, we have the material, we have the pipelines and the processing ability. So we're just going to, shift to Venezuelan gas and we'll continue to produce with like a revenue sharing agreement. And I thought this was a terrible idea because it didn't take into account the political risk of exactly what we're seeing today, right? So they looked at it purely on the economics. And I was like, this. Well, first of all, the Maduro government, if it's really successful, they'll just seize all of the assets as they've done before, right? And they just wouldn't pay the Trinidad government. But even if it's not successful, even if it is successful, he could be ousted because of what looks like a pending revolution. And they don't have to honor these agreements anymore. They will need all of the revenues coming in to support the rebuilding of the entire economy. And they might say, well, Trinidad and Tobago, we're going to renegotiate and it's not going to be as good for them.
Right.
One final point on this, and this is the debate we were just having before we got onto the air. Again, Trinidad has there's an anti-American streak in Trinidad, and it's not justified for any reason, but they think much like other, U.S. interventions, the Americans are doing this to get oil. And as you and I were just discussing, that doesn't really add up. In fact, because of the U.S. shale and oil production and gas production, the United States has gone from a net importer of oil to a net exporter right behind Saudi Arabia in terms of production, right? They are now the second largest producer of Brent, it's shale oil, West Texas WTI oil. So they don't need oil, right? It's like, why would that be in their interest? And even on the flip side of that, and this is my final point, the more oil that comes into production with the global slowdown that's coming, the lower the oil prices, which is not good for the US oil producers, right? It's good for the consumers, I guess, because goods get cheaper for transport. But you actually want there to be more shutdowns in oil if you want the price to come up and for the economy to be boosted from the oil revenue. So none of that makes sense to me. And yeah, this is where we're at.
Yeah. No, I mean, I guess I wasn't informed enough to really know exactly, because I was talking about the whole, the meme of the U.S. goes everywhere in the world to get oil. The meme is like, oh, a teenager is sitting there like, my face is getting all oily now. And then the next part of the meme is like a whole bunch of Marines with guns are like all over his face, like securing the oil.
Securing some freedom for his face.
Exactly.
But Team America shows up,
I'd figured that maybe, does the meme hold any truth at all? Does the U.S. actually go into other countries still to secure, maybe not to like straight up steal the oil, but to at least through, corporate lobbyists to secure like interests? So they secure it to install, governments or local officials that are more friendly to big oil companies to go in there and put in rigs that they can run and make money off of.
Yeah, I would say the contracts is probably the bigger honeypot. So Halliburton, for instance, one of the big oil and gas. I mean, they're just a conglomerate. They do everything. They got a lot of sweet deal contracts in Iraq and possibly Afghanistan. And like the private security forces, they got some very rich contracts. But again, it's not actual production because it's US money, government money, just going to private corporations. Then the money comes right back to the US, right? These American companies just pocket from this corporatist agreement. But you're right in terms of securing the oil supply to a certain extent. That was the Kuwait war, the first Iraq war, was when Iraq moved into Kuwait and the US forces. So Gulf War I with Bush Sr., it was because Kuwait was an exporter to the US. The dynamic of all of that has changed because of shale technology. And there is literally too much oil, right? And that's not even to mention like the new finds in Uganda and Guyana, again, in Latin America. They haven't even come online yet. And we already have too much oil. We already have like way too much oil being produced. And these other new finds that they've come up with, it's going to flood the market even more. But yeah, it's U.S. independence, energy independence changes the political standing of the Middle East and their interventionist policy. So it's a good thing as far as I'm concerned.
Because these corporations, and they get all corporation-y.
Is this the Team America podcast today?